You're listening to WLPN 105.5 FM in Chicago, and you're listening to Labor Express Radio, Chicago's only English language labor news and current affairs radio program. News for people by working people. I'm your host, Jerry Mead Lucero, and this is the Sunday, March 25th, 2018 edition of Labor Express. On the last several programs of Labor Express Radio, I spent much of the episode discussing the likely outcome of the U.S. Supreme Court case Janus versus AFSCME. Most observers expect the conservative-leaning court will agree with Janus and his corporate supporters and eliminate the ability of public sector unions to collect what are called agency or fair share fees. The result will most likely be huge losses to the resources for public sector unions, making it much harder for them to effectively represent their members. As public sector unions remain the last bastion of an extremely weak labor movement in this country, the outcome of the Janus decision is quite literally an existential issue for the U.S. labor movement. This news is necessarily gloomy, and my reporting on the situation has reflected this dark moment for the working people in the United States. But at this most dire moment in the history of organized labor in this country, working people themselves have provided an answer and have issued a dramatic challenge to the powers that be. West Virginia's teachers are a shining beacon of light in the darkness. Please excuse my seemingly hyperbolic language, but this description is certainly appropriate in describing the excitement among labor activists that has resulted from the historic victory of striking teachers in West Virginia. On March 5th, after a statewide 9-day strike, not only teachers but all state public employees won a 5% wage increase in West Virginia and other important gains, most specifically funding of their health care. To understand the historic importance of this victory, I must first set the scene. West Virginia is commonly seen as one of the least progressive, most politically backward states in the nation. In the last presidential election, no other state in the Union voted for Donald Trump by such a huge margin, 42.2% over Clinton. The right-wing and highly corrupt character of the state's politics stem from a long history of the state being dominated by corporate interests of one industry, coal. Indeed, West Virginia is the state-level equivalent of a company town. As a result, the laws of the state are stacked against working people. Much of what Janus seeks to achieve for the public sector nationwide already exists in West Virginia. A right-to-work state, West Virginia is already totally open shop, meaning it is very difficult for unions to maintain their membership or collect dues. What's worse, though public sector workers are allowed to join unions voluntarily, the unions cannot carry out their primary functions and negotiate on behalf of workers' wages and working conditions. Public sector unions are banned by state law from collective bargaining. It is one of the most anti-union states in the country, a situation even worse than what Janus seeks to achieve nationally. But there's another side to West Virginia. West Virginia has a long, proud labor history. Indeed, the history of organized labor in the state is one of the most radical, most militant, and often, sadly, the most bloody in the history of the U.S. West Virginia was the site of many an important labor battle, like Matewan and the Battle of Blair Mountain, often described as the largest labor uprising in the U.S. in the 20th century, and the largest insurrection in the country since the Civil War. West Virginia was and is a stronghold of the United Mine Workers of America, and so can be said to be a birthplace of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the nation's most important and powerful industrial union federation, organized by UNWA President John L. Lewis and others in the 1930s. West Virginia was part of the historic Pittston coal strike of 1989 through 90. And even though mine workers' unions have fallen on tough times and their numbers and power are a mere shadow of what they once were, the memory of these struggles and the pride they engender run deep in the working people of West Virginia. It is against this backdrop that the teachers and public employees of West Virginia burst onto the national labor scene February 23rd with a largely spontaneous, rank-and-file-led, technically illegal statewide strike that resulted in the seemingly impossible, a wage increase for all state employees. Teachers in West Virginia are some of the worst paid in the country, and increases in their health insurance premiums in the coming year were threatening to reduce teachers' incomes even further. What started as a fight to save teachers' health care resulted in major gains for state employees and a clear demonstration of working class power and the ability to fight back and win gains for the working class, even under the most hostile of anti-union political regimes. And their example is spreading fast around the nation. Teachers in several other right-to-work states with similar anti-union laws and political climates are taking actions similar to what happened in West Virginia, including Oklahoma, Arizona, and Kentucky. I want to spend several programs, if possible, discussing the significance of the West Virginia teachers' strike, and we start that tonight by hearing from one of the rank-and-file leaders of the strike, elementary school math teacher Olivia Morris. Morris is such a great example of how regular working people in moments of crisis can discover the power of collective action. Olivia was not a labor activist previously. Indeed, like many of her fellow teachers, Olivia was not even consistently a member of the teachers' union, a situation which is common in so-called right-to-work states. But in a matter of a few weeks, Morris became a leader of one of the nation's most historic public employee strikes. Olivia Morris and her fellow teachers decided to hell with laws and restrictions on public sector unions in her state, and to hell with those who said a strike could not possibly be won. They organized a statewide wildcat strike in a matter of days. They occupied the state capitol with hundreds and at times thousands of public employees for 9 days straight until the government gave in and basically conceded to all of their demands. On March 9th, Olivia Morris was invited to speak to the Chicago Teachers Union about her experience. Labor Express radio reporter Dale Lehman attended and captured the event for us. It's not surprising that the CTU would be so interested in hearing from the West Virginia teachers, as Olivia Morris states in her speech, the historic Chicago teacher strike of 2012 was a great source of inspiration to the West Virginia teachers. All of tonight's audio was collected by Dale at this CTU event, in which the CTU Political and Legislative Director Stacy Davis Gates interviews Olivia about the events in West Virginia. What I'll present tonight are excerpts of that interview. It's not the most structured narrative of the events in West Virginia, as the conversation often drifted between different topics. Olivia's talk was delivered only days after the strike's conclusion, and the fog of events comes across in the presentation. The discussion is also far from a complete retelling and analysis of the most important elements of the West Virginia strike. It leaves out some key important details and leaves unanswered some important questions. I hope to fill in these gaps in upcoming episodes. But what you do get from Olivia's talk is a great sense of the spirit of the events in West Virginia, how average workers organized and fought back against great odds to win a stunning victory for working people. In this first segment, Olivia Morris introduces herself and offers a bit of background on the history of West Virginia and the conditions that teachers face in her state.
I grew up in West Virginia, and it's a struggle to stay and a guilt trip to leave that you put on yourself, because it's a beautiful, amazing, wonderful state, but it doesn't have a lot to offer you in money-wise and quality of life-wise. So I have traveled, but I continue to stay in West Virginia, and I went to Marshall, eventually moved to Charleston, which is the capital, only an hour away from Huntington. I always lived within an hour one way or another, and made my way into elementary school. Luckily, I have an outside friend who, outside I say from West Virginia. There aren't many people who live in West Virginia who are not from West Virginia. He's from Texas, but he loves West Virginia, okay. And he's a huge union member and is very involved in the union, but loves rank and file work. And he's studied the Chicago strike. He is just a big scholar of the labor movements, and we would have these discussions about what was happening to West Virginia public education and that I didn't know about. And so I would go, he would speak at different hearings for things, and I would go to support him. And in supporting him, I learned all of the awful things that were going to be happening. And just as someone who loves West Virginia, who loves fighting for causes that are right, and who can't shut up about things, I just started trying to inform people in my life of what was happening, because I knew that they weren't taking the initiative. Not blaming them for that, they just...
But you don't shut down an entire state just by having a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah.
So how do you move from the discussions that you're having with your activist, labor intense friend, to you guys are shutting down school in the entire state? How does that happen? How do you get from northern West Virginia to southern West Virginia and all in between and just descend upon the Capitol?
There were definitely stages within this entire process, and we decided. So Jay was the guy who is from Texas who got me involved in this. He also had a few friends from around the state who he got involved. And we became this kind of small core outside of union leadership group.
Okay.
And within that group, we discussed, how are we going to inform people? What is it the questions that you had? Mm-hmm. And it was, we need to make sure that people are calling the Capitol.
Okay.
We need to have discussions in the teacher's lounge, and my question, because I was worried that I wasn't allowed to have conversations about not even using the S word, strike, not even using the S word in class, I mean, in school, right, but talking about the things that the legislature was doing. I was afraid to talk about that at school because
Why?
I thought...
Tell me why.
I thought that it was illegal.
Okay.
Because I didn't know. And I thought that the principal was going to get mad at me, or I thought that somebody might turn us in for talking about things that affected us on school property, on public property that the taxpayers pay for. And then my core group of friends were like, they gave me examples of how they were doing it. And they were having it in the teacher's lounge, but as math intervention, my schedule is different than everybody else's, so I couldn't. So I went to my principal. Luckily, I think that I might be unique in having a wonderful, supportive principal.
Okay.
And so I went to her and said, listen, do you know what's happening? And informed her of things. And she said, it's okay. Let's talk about it at our Touch Base Tuesday.
Okay.
And so...
And Touch Base Tuesday
Touch Base Tuesday is the 30-minute meeting we have every week with the staff.
Okay.
To touch base on the things that are happening that week. And I was nervous because unions are political. Or
What does
at least
that
in
mean?
West Virginia.
So when you say political is a big word.
Right.
So what type of imagery or fear even does that like?
We have a strong union history, but the people who have the political officials, the politicians who have supported unions in the past, have been Democrats.
Okay.
Democrats are union. If you're union, you're Democrat. If you're Republican, you're not, because of right to work. We had that pass a few years ago also that was led by the Republicans. And so since we went Trump, and religion is also kind of synonymous with Republicans, at least in West Virginia. And
In most places.
and we're still in the Bible Belt,
For
so a lot of people who I work with are very religious.
Right.
And because religion is tied to politics, and politics is, Republican politics, and there aren't a whole lot of Democrats that I knew of, and you don't talk about politics, so I didn't want to ask anybody. It was just this whole big conflict that I had within myself. How are they going to relate to me? Are they going to look at me like I am some bad person who's trying to preach to them about politics? Are they going to agree with me or understand? And so I have to work with these people, and it was a little bit of
It was
pride.
uncomfortable.
It was.
So how did the Tuesday meeting provide that space to have the conversation?
So I stood up, and we're a small school, it's 2 classes per grade, so 12 classes. And I was shaking. I mean, I am an actor. I will talk in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, but I was shaking in front of these 25 people and having a hard time speaking because I was nervous. But as I stood there talking about insurance and talking about the taxes that have been cut and the jobs that have decreased and how the 1% raise that the governor had promised us in his state address was just going to, the insurance was going to eat the 1% raise that we were getting. As I was telling them these things, I saw the people who I was most terrified of shaking their heads. And that helped me, not a whole lot, because I was still really nervous.
Right.
Because it was new to me too. I'm not an expert on it. But that helped me kind of move forward, and it helped open up the conversations that they were having in the teacher's lounge at lunch breaks.
Because they were already aware that they were going to be losing.
They weren't until I talked to them.
So no one had informed them.
No one.
So talk to me about how you go from being up in front of your staff, 25 people talking about this, to a 20,000 person Facebook group.
So we were really struggling, my friends and I, in this small cluster of group, because we only had maybe 1,000 members in the group.
Okay.
And we were discussing, why aren't more people upset about this? Why aren't more people talking about this? Do they not know? Do they not care? Do they not know how? Are they feeling like they're being preached at?
Right.
What's going on? How can we get them involved? And someone said, when are we going to go on strike? And I'm not kidding you, 24 hours later, we were up to 16,000 members.
Interesting.
And then, a week later, we were at 20,000.
The S word is what catalyzed
It did.
the response from the people.
Yeah.
Okay, so then how do you take 20,000 people on in the Facebook chat and then begin to organize across the state? Because when I saw all of you in red in the state capitol, I was like, somebody has really pissed everyone off. Because, we ain't all going to agree on one thing in here, right? So how do you feel a state capitol in a state with regional differences, to your point, partisan differences, religious issues with the word strike? How do you do that? So who's your boogeyman in West Virginia? Who was the guy hanging in effigy? Because it's a guy.
At first, it was the PEIA board.
Okay.
It was Public Employees Insurance Agency. At first, it was them.
Are they elected or appointed?
They are appointed by the governor, and it used to be that they had one teacher and who was representative and one service personnel representative. And then last year or 2 years ago, I'm sorry,
After right to work.
it was cut.
Yep.
They were cut.
Okay.
So then it was just these people appointed
Okay.
who were on the PEIA board.
And could you tell me a little bit about their makeup?
I think that most of them are insurance.
Okay.
Just strictly in the trade of insurance, but I can't be quoted on that. I haven't done my research. But it quickly turned. The reason I don't know it is because it quickly turned to, it's not the PEIA and the insurance board, it's the government.
Okay.
It is the legislature, because they haven't given the board any money to work with. Health insurance costs are rising.
So you've identified we don't have enough revenue.
Yes.
Okay. Keep talking.
Yeah, so insurance costs are rising. We found out that it would be $50 million or $60 million in addition to what we were already making for this year, and then with 6% inflation every year after that.
She's a math teacher.
That they would have to give us to be able to keep the benefits that we have.
Okay.
So the way that PEIA, because the legislature said, well, this is the money that we're giving you, and the term is fixed PEIA or fully fund PEIA, the Republicans, and I hate it that it's down the line, but it was strictly straight down the line, Democrats voting and Republicans voting. But they were saying, we have fully funded PEIA. We've given them the money. They just need to figure out what to do with it. It's them. So it was a lot of back and forth, blaming one another. But people were smarter than that. People saw through that. So then once we found that out as a core group, we really pushed that to the members at large. So that way before the politicians started blaming it on the PEIA board, everybody knew that it was the revenue issue.
Okay, so let me also do something quickly. So you guys are an insurgent group of teachers, basically.
Yes, and
public employees.
Yeah, public employees, yeah.
Where's union leadership?
They were there. They were there, and after talking to delegate members of AFT and delegate members of WVEA, which is the West Virginia subset or
NEA.
Chapter of NEA, they have been fighting this fight
Okay.
for several years.
How were they fighting it?
They were fighting it by going to the Capitol,
Okay.
having a lobbying day, saying this is what teachers deserve. We are speaking for the teachers, but it wasn't doing. I'm sure that it did something, but the issue was, and it's gotten better because of the strike and because of the backlash that they got. It wasn't shared widely or effectively enough. It might have been communicated, but it wasn't effective, so that way everybody knew this is what the unions are doing. This is what we have done. These are the specific fights that we have fought. These are the ways that we have fought them. And
These are the ways that you can engage.
yes. And so I know that some members, rank and file members, went to the union leaders of not only their local maybe it was their local chapters, and then the local chapter leaders went to the state leaders, but they didn't believe that teachers were ready. They didn't believe that a strike was going to happen.
So what made them believe?
Oh, they had to. It was happening in front of their eyes. So they had to say, okay, let's do this.
So then,
You're listening to Labor Express Radio News for people by working people, and our coverage of the historic, victorious strike by Western Virginia teachers, as told by Western Virginia Elementary School math teacher Olivia Morris at a gathering organized by the Chicago Teachers Union. In this next excerpt, Morris describes how the West Virginia teachers defied expectations, regressive labor laws, and even their own union's reluctance to organize a statewide strike. What's particularly interesting is how Olivia relates this to the character of the working people of West Virginia and their long history of struggle.
because I can imagine this tension, right? So you laid out that they're doing their annual lobby day. They're having these conversations. And things are still moving at snail's pace. They're in this circle from the board to the legislature to the board, hamster on a wheel, basically.
Yeah.
And then Facebook.
And Facebook, yeah. That was the platform at which it happened. Yeah.
And then do you guys just start showing up in Charleston? Like, how does anyone get a clue that this exists, right? Do you send out a press release? Is it a hustle, a mass tweet? What's going on here?
So I like to describe West Virginia as, you have your mountain mama. We call her our mountain mama from the John Denver song, and she cradles us, right? She gives us life, she gives us love, she gives us everything. And each section of the state, because there aren't very many, have their own characters that have their own. They're a child of the family. And Southern West Virginia is that wild, rebellious child that will do anything, say anything, doesn't think before they speak, and are going to be damned if anybody stops them from doing what they want to do.
Okay.
So their role, because they have, out of anybody in the state, they have been beaten, battered, abused, and the only word to describe it, we have tried to find another word, but they have been raped of everything.
Now that's pretty provocative. Can you explain what goes into making a decision to use that particular word to describe the context of their lives there?
So, coal is the ground that we live on and that they live on, and it's the only thing. When we were settled, when West Virginia was settled, it was basically settled, and they saw, coal, let's extract it, let's do something with it. So there wasn't an ability to establish any kind of economy as we know it today.
A single-sourced economy.
Right, and so they decided, okay, let's start extracting this, and then eventually, which it was working for them fine, because it was the local people pulling it out to power their homes and power their businesses. But then, of course, they saw here's an ability to make money. A larger company came in, and it turned into, and I don't know the history well enough, but I know that out-of-state corporations, and I don't know if it was out-of-state coming in or people in-state leaving and then keeping the business going in West Virginia, but they gave the workers, eventually, after the Union Wars, they gave them money for their land and money for the coal. But at first they didn't. And they took everything and didn't put it back into...
So robbed the land of its resources.
Yeah. And they're about to do the same thing with gas. And with the coal, okay, so yes, they're giving money to the landowners. Yes, they're giving money to the workers, which they should have done. They should have given money to the landowners and to the workers who worked freaking hard for their companies.
Taxes.
They pay no taxes to the state of West Virginia. And so now they have left, and we don't have anything to keep our economy alive. The rest of the state has not benefited from that money, and not only the rest of the state, but the areas of southern West Virginia are hit hard by the opioid crisis. The people who live there are wonderful, intelligent people who just want respect and haven't gotten respect. And so that's why they are, rightfully so, first on the line.
Right.
First to call people out and say, you know what, we demand respect, we deserve respect, and you're going to give it to us.
So how did they drag the rest of you guys with, though?
I don't think they dragged us with them. I think that they inspired us and made us feel comfortable.
Okay.
It was like, oh man, we're itching to do this. We want to do this, we want to do this, but we have so much fear and we have a lot of apprehension, and how are we going to do it? And are we going to have all of the support? The same questions you all are asking. How are we going to get the people from the Eastern Panhandle who who have talked about seceding from us and, becoming part of Virginia because they have better working conditions and higher taxes and higher property taxes, so that way they can get better public education systems, and who commute to Washington, D.C. How are we going to get them a part of this fight? And Southern West Virginia said, we don't care if y'all join us. We're going to do it anyway because it's what we want and it's what we deserve. Right. And so it was an inspiration to us to say, all right, I guess we can do it.
You're listening to Labor Express Radio, which calls only English language labor news and current affairs radio program, and our coverage of the historic victorious strike by West Virginia teachers, as told by West Virginia elementary school math teacher Olivia Morris at a gathering organized by the Chicago Teachers Union. In this next excerpt, CTU Political and Legislative Director Stacy Davis Gates asks Olivia to explain how the teachers organized the strike. In explaining the situation, Olivia describes how the rank and file pushed the union itself to overcome its reluctance to engage in what was actually an illegal strike under West Virginia's regressive labor laws. Note that because West Virginia is a right-to-work state, many of these teachers were not actually union members, but the unions were smart not to let this be a barrier to their participation in the struggle and decision-making.
So were there a series? See, here's what I'm relating it back to, because Chicago, right? I'm relating it back to our struggle here. I remember a series of small things that we did: rallies, demonstrations, and then boom, right?
Yeah.
Did it take all of that?
Okay, so the Southern counties called it Fed Up Friday. Okay. And they demanded the union leaders in the counties to take a vote on whether or not to go. Of course, they had almost unanimous vote to go out. Okay. But they, I guess, wanted to do it officially, and they, are paying union dues, so they want the unions to do the work. And then they all went in buses to the Capitol. Hundreds of people. I was lucky enough to be able to go, and I just was crying the whole time, oh my gosh, these people are so amazing, and they're chanting, and they all had these red shirts that every single one of them were the exact same. They had their counties on the back. Okay. And so that's what they did. And then everybody else said, all right, we're ready to go Monday. Let's all go Monday. And the union said, no, we can't go Monday. You don't understand what a strike entails. You don't understand what it's going to happen. So they said, you need public support. We need public support. We need to say that we have done absolutely everything before we go on strike, because that's our last card. That's the last card we have. We can't.
And what did you guys say?
Okay, fine, we'll do what you want. But that pent up so much energy, and there was so much anger for those 3 days. And then the unions, they listened to the teachers. We called and called and called and called. So that was our first step.
So who were you calling?
Senators and delegates.
Okay, so the first task was to organize a call-in.
Yes.
Got it.
And emails.
Yeah, okay.
Same thing. And on the Facebook group, people were sharing their emails. People were sharing the scripts that they had when they called. So that way it gave a lot of people who didn't have confidence in that kind of thing to be able to do that same thing. And people were also sharing the responses that they got from the senators and the delegates. They would screenshot it and post it. And a lot of them were not good, which fueled people even more.
So they were insulting.
They were insulting.
Okay.
Or I don't want to name names, but
Please, we like names.
there were a couple of responses that were incredibly grammatically incorrect, had no punctuation.
To a teacher?
Oh, yes.
That's awesome.
And there were some that literally made no sense. People would be like, what does this mean? And I mean, we would just scour through, and people would put question marks and try and figure it out, but we couldn't decipher
ink pens
it.
everywhere.
Yeah, we couldn't decipher what they meant. So it just fueled the fire. And so we did all of that, and what the union leaders did say is they said, we're listening to you, we will cast a vote, but so all of that was happening up until, so when the 3 marched out on Fed Up Friday, the rest of us did what's called a walk-in, which I think that you all are familiar with. Right. And so that was the rest of our way. And not all counties did that.
Okay.
Because there were still some counties who had no idea what was going on.
Interesting.
So it was a good step. And looking back on it, a lot of the things that we as, rank and file members, or just people who weren't a part of the union, public employees, everyone, and that was the true beauty of this, is that even the union leaders, they didn't care if you were union. Maybe they did care if you were union or not, but they didn't say it. They let everybody vote, they let everybody speak, they let everybody come to the meetings. So they didn't question that. They were true leaders in the fact that they said, okay, we're going to do this for all. But anyway, that's a separate issue. So we wouldn't have been 55 strong had we not taken that first week to do the walk-ins. So
So you built capacity.
We did build capacity, but the people who did the walk-ins on Friday did not want to do any more walk-ins. They did not want to do any more honk and waves. They did not want to write any more emails or call any more people, because they had done that over and over and over again. There were some people who, after school, and even in one case, the principal let some of the teachers leave school early, sent their kids off into other rooms, and let them go to the Capitol and sit in on education and finance committees.
Okay.
That were happening before school was out.
Okay.
So that was a step that many people took if they could. And then, so we had all of the votes, and then the next Thursday and Friday, people had caught up.
Okay.
Superintendents were somewhat shamed into, not shamed, but when all of your teachers are going to be out, and 3 superintendents of the state have already closed schools for this fight, are handing out coffee and donuts and on the picket line with these
So the
staff.
boss is out there too.
Yes.
So they discovered their public employees as well.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so those 3 superintendents set the stage. Well, one of them didn't. He actually, I don't know, he called schools off, but then he canceled schools and said because of an illegal work stoppage, whereas the other 2...
Well, that was his job, right?
Right. It was, But he got so much flack for it. I mean, the teachers just bashed him. People were bashing him everywhere. How could you do this? What are you thinking? There are these other 2 superintendents who have closed down schools in such a positive way in support of their teachers. And you're in southern West Virginia and in the Union towns, and you're saying it's an illegal work stoppage. And so I think that the rest of the superintendents were kind of treading lightly.
Right.
And wanted to stay within the bounds of their job and the legality of it, but they also wanted to and kind of had to support the movement.
You're listening to Labor Express Radio News for people by working people, and our coverage of a historic victorious strike by West Virginia teachers, as told by West Virginia elementary school math teacher Olivia Morris at a gathering organized by the Chicago Teachers Union. Stacy Davis Gates asked Olivia about local media coverage of the strike, and in her response, Olivia points out how the media and politicians in the state try to set teachers against other state employees. It's a strategy that failed as the teachers wisely stood in solidarity with all public employees and won a 5% wage increase that will apply to all state workers.
They were slow to catch on. They didn't really report it. They would report it occasionally, but it was always with the view, because teachers a sexier term, teachers want a raise. But it wasn't about the teachers. It wasn't about the raise. It was about the public employees and their insurance.
Right.
And the strikers and the public employees were so angry about it, but it hurt the teachers because the public employees were only paying attention to, well, not all public employees, but a lot of public employees were only paying attention to the news. And they were saying why aren't the teachers talking about us? Why is it, the teachers aren't supporting us. They're doing this for their own good. So they were, some public employees who were on the Facebook group with us were bashing us for not supporting them, where it was like, no, my blue shirt is because of the public employees.
Right.
We have a red shirt for the teachers. We have blue. So we established days. That was one of the earlier steps.
Okay.
Was red for ed on Wednesdays. Sorry, red for ed on Wednesdays. Blue Mondays for public employees, and then red and blue, because we're teachers, put together as purple. So as a unified group, we wore purple shirts on Fridays. So Monday was public employees, Wednesday was red for ed, and then Friday was for solidarity. And somehow that escaped a lot of the public employees, and so it was personally hurting for a lot of us teachers who were like, no, we're out here fighting for you too. Stop lying, news. So I actually was interviewed by a guy who's kind of since become a good acquaintance, but he was interviewing me for a TV station, for a local TV station, and he kept asking me about the raise. Well, what do you think about the raise? Don't you have student loans that you have to pay? And finally I said, listen, I'm not going to interview with you anymore. If you are going to make this piece about teachers and the raise, then we're done. We're done here. And he said, all right. We'll talk about public employee health care. Let's go ahead and talk about it. And luckily, I think in the interview, I let him know, I gave him a lot of good points as to why we're in this fight, and so he did throw something in there about the public employee health care. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
You're listening to Labor Express Radio, which calls the only English language labor news and current affairs radio program, and our coverage of a historic victorious strike by West Virginia teachers, as told by West Virginia elementary school math teacher Olivia Morris at a gathering organized by the Chicago Teachers Union. In the final segment that we have time to air on tonight's program, Olivia talks a bit about how the teachers rejected numerous attempts by politicians and even their own union leadership to compromise and end the strike early. As a result, they won all of their demands, including an across-the-board 5% wage increase for all state workers and protection of their health care benefits. The workers' militancy paid off, as well as the support they received from the broader public, including one little boy.
So talk to me, though, about, so you guys, there's obviously tensions between public employees and the teachers because to the point that the media teachers are a more sympathetic phase. You have children attached to them, entire communities that need them, right? But the issue is actually all public employees are under attack at the same time. So you figure out how to deal with some of those tensions. What were some of the other tensions that were happening? We've talked about the rank and file activists and, the union leadership. We've talked about teachers and public employees. Are there any other tensions that we've missed? And then how did you resolve them?
So one of the things was that we were really struggling with was, what is our position?
Okay.
Because it started as public employee health care. We wanted to fund PEIA, fully fund PEIA, not for this year, but for all future years. So we wanted a consistent revenue source in the books for how we're going to fund our health care.
Okay.
But then, because it's an election year, because this was starting to become something more than just what this was, because we were seeing how corrupt the government was, we said, okay, how are we going to, what is our fight? And that was such a big struggle, because there were different people from different counties saying, this is what our goal is, this is what our proposal is. My core group of friends, we created a proposal. And then there was no proposal from union leadership until further on, maybe about a week before negotiations happened.
Okay.
And from a big thing that happened was WVEA and AFT joined forces, and WVSSPA, which is West Virginia School Service Personnel Association. They all joined forces, which was this huge deal, amazing, fantastic, because they've always been at odds and always, kind of tried to, they're two entities who want the same people. So they put out a statement. We want 5%. We want a full consistent revenue source for PEIA. We want all of the bills attacking public education off the table, and we want the paycheck protection bill, which is to keep union dues from coming out every single year. You have to re-sign up to have your union dues taken out of your paycheck every year, and that was off the table. Those were the things that we wanted, but that wasn't defined until later, and people were...
How much later?
Not until a week before negotiations, and and they tried to get it out through a couple of flyers, but they kept saying, it's our strategy. We can't tell you all because it's our strategy. If it gets out...
What does that feel like when you're occupying this
so
space?
Infuriating. Because we wanted to know what we were fighting for. It was like, okay, what are we fighting for? And it was hard to get... those of us who wanted this, who realized the effect that we could have, were struggling with our coworkers who didn't understand, who didn't want to be striking, who didn't want to be fighting, who weren't going to do the work stoppages. How could we get them on board if they didn't know what they were risking? And we didn't know if the superintendents were going to call off schools and if we were going to have a work stoppage. So they thought, well, I don't have money to pay my loans. I don't have money to pay for my kids to eat. I don't have money to pay for my rent or my mortgage. I don't know what I'll be losing in this and what I'll be gaining by the losses. So it was infuriating because we just wanted that from them and they were not giving it to us. So we tried as my friend group, and we disagreed, which is why it was this struggle of, okay, well, we want to be leaders in this, but we also respect the unions and understand that they are the leaders. They are the ones going to the negotiating table. So how are we going to balance this?
So did anyone from the rank and file space make it to the negotiating table? Or how close?
No, they didn't. And no, they didn't. Right. Yeah, no, because the issue that happened, I know some of you probably know, but the Tuesday when the three presidents
they said it was over, and you said
no. See you Thursday. Get off the stage. And so had, one of us been on in that negotiation, then that would have had a different outcome for sure.
So then let's stay there for a moment.
Uh-huh.
So demands are happening so we're flying the plane as we're building the plane.
Mm-hmm.
We're risking everything, but not very clear on what we're about to gain. You have a leadership that isn't necessarily plugged into everyone that's inside of the Capitol.
Yeah, right.
There are competing negotiating stances and desires from this group and this group, this region and that region. They go into a room, they come out and say, we won. And you said, no, we didn't. And they said, let's go back to work. And you said, no, we're not. Okay, so then what happens? Like at that moment when you tell them no, what happens?
Oh man. We were all kind of, I don't want to say all, but because there were some people who were adamant about what they were going to do. They weren't going to back down. No, we're not going to leave. But there were also people who had that question. Well, geez, there's so much more to this than us just going and yelling. We have to, what's going to happen? So then all that night throughout the Facebook group, people were asking, because there were hundreds of people there, but there weren't the mass thousands of people there because it was a Tuesday night.
Okay.
And so there were so many different stances or changes about how much money they were going to give us.
Okay.
At first it was 1%, then it was 1% over 5 years. Then it was 2%, 1%, 1%, 1%. Then it was 2%, 1%, 1%. They were hoping to get that by without anybody noticing somehow.
No math teachers.
No. And then and then Governor Justice, who had been completely MIA the whole time, decided to go on town hall tours. And a young boy, Gideon, 6th grade, stood up and asked him the question, why are you putting gas companies above us? Why are you fighting so hard against giving teachers and public employees what they need? And then he gave him this spiel about how, well, if you charge too many taxes, then the businesses won't come here, and then we won't be able to have a good economy. And the boy said, well, why aren't you investing in the kids? Because we can grow up and we can make a good economy too if we're educated. And
there were cameras.
And he went home, Governor Justice went home, and the next day he went to the negotiating table with the union leaders.
Okay.
And that's the night, so that was the Tuesday night, that the union leaders came out and said, I think, and I do not blame them for doing it this way. I think that they had purely good intentions with what they were doing. I think that they were amazed at what the governor did, because he came in and he said, "I'll give you everything."
So after
That's
being
on your checklist.
absent, he says hi, and they swooned.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and they were just kind of like, oh, okay, well, we got it. Yeah, sure. This is a great step in the right direction, guys. Let's go back to school on Thursday. We are on the task force. It will be good. It's a great step in the right direction. And people were like, "What? Are you kidding me? No, we're not going back. No. How dare you do that and speak for us, because that's not the case at all." And so then we fought. The bill was eventually amended because they had passed the 211. And so the bill was amended and sent to the House. The House, all but one person voted yes to the bill. So Republican, Democrat, everyone voted yes to the 5%.
What day is this again? Like in the number?
This was, I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, day 5.
Day 5. Now, are parents calling them? Are parents emailing them?
That was one of the steps, was we have done everything that we can. This was not yet, though. Not
Okay.
yet. So it had gone to the House. The House had said yes, and it was being sent to the Senate. The Senate tabled it. They would not see to it because they did not believe the governor was telling the truth. Not that he was lying, but that he was like our president and just spewing things out because he wanted it to happen.
Okay.
They said the revenue's not there. We don't have the money. What money is he talking about? He said that we only had 1%. You all should be happy with 1%. Last year, the union said they'd be happy with a 2% raise when the money wasn't there. Why are you, I forget what the whole argument was, but why are you asking for more when, and so, or why aren't you happy? And they just delayed and delayed and delayed and tabled the bill and wouldn't talk about it.
Because at the same time, the session is almost over too, right?
Yes,
right?
We had 10 days left, I think, or something.
So you're racing against the end of session. Kids have been out of school for a number of days, and the tactic is, or the strategy is, to stall.
Yeah, and to get the public against the teachers. We are going to anger the public because the teachers are being selfish and not going back to school, so they were just delaying until they had their finance people look over and find out if the money was there. Well, it turns out, which we all knew, and this proves us right in the end in not going back, because if imagine had we actually gone back on Thursday, we would not have gotten any of this. But they said that they were waiting on a fiscal note from the governor's office. Well, the fiscal note was there from the House, from the governor and the House the whole time. I guess they also said that they were trying to find out, because they wanted it to go to the Senate Finance Committee. The Finance Committee had to approve it, and then it had to go to the Senate, and then they had to approve it. But the Finance Committee said, well, we can't talk about this. They put it 15th on their agenda. Out of 15 items, they put it very last. And they kept saying, well, it's just not right for us to put everything on hold for these educators. It's just not right for us to stop the way that politics work. And it's like, come on, you have thousands of people outside. You don't see the urgency in this. You have kids waiting. So turns out it all unfolded because the Senate voted down the bill. They said no. And so because at that point they had said no, they amended the bill to say 4% for teachers. It went back to the House. The House voted no against that 4% bill. So then they had to create a special, smaller, a conference committee. And then that conference committee stalled. And they apparently, it came out in this, they hadn't asked for the information that they were trying to find from the state superintendent's office about the amount of money that people made, or they wanted something from the West Virginia Department of Education that they hadn't even asked for, that they said they were waiting on, but they hadn't even asked for it. And once they did ask for it, they got it within 30 minutes of asking for it. And they said that they were waiting the whole time to find out this information.
So you're dealing with incompetence, you're dealing with
just flat out lies. Flat out lies.
Okay, just flat out lies.
Yeah.
What we could cover on tonight's program are only excerpts of Olivia Morris's hour-and-a-half-long presentation to the CTU. I will have a few more excerpts from Morris's talk on our next episode in 2 weeks' time, especially when Olivia discusses how the teachers' strike has led working people in West Virginia to engage in a broader fight against the regressive political regime in her state. You definitely want to tune in for that. On future episodes, I also hope to have a deeper analysis of the meaning of the West Virginia strike and what it teaches us about mounting a working-class fight back in this era of low union density and increasingly hostile anti-union political climate. So please tune in to our next episode in 2 weeks for more. In the meantime, if you wish to hear Olivia's presentation in its entirety without edits or excerpts, there are 2 ways you can do so right now. I'm making Dale's unedited raw audio available to all through the Labor Express Facebook page. Check it out at our Facebook page, which is facebook.laborexpress.org, facebook.laborexpress.org. Also linked up there is a video of the event produced by the CTU, so if you prefer seeing as well as hearing the talk, check that out, again, at facebook.laborexpress.org. Before we go, I want to reiterate what I said at the top of tonight's program. The example of the West Virginia teachers is quickly spreading, and teachers in right-to-work states, including Oklahoma, Arizona, and Kentucky, have launched similar efforts. I will have more on this on upcoming episodes of Labor Express. That's all for tonight's program. Of course, you can always find out more about the issues, organizations, and people discussed here on Labor Express by going to our Facebook page, which again is easy to find at facebook.laborexpress.org. Labor Express is a nonprofit 501c3 member of IBEW Local 1220. The views expressed on Labor Express are those of its producers, not those of the IBEW. Labor Express is a production of the Committee for Labor Rights in Chicago, the world capital of the labor movement. The song was our theme is called Workers' Song. It was written by Ed Pickford and recorded by the Dropkick Murphys. Tune in next Sunday at 8 p.m. for another edition of Labor Express.